Welcome to HOA, aka Huckleberry's Outdoor Adventures. Long time no here. Been busy and did a couple episodes to have them on deck. Guess what happened? Yeah, lost power, lost the episodes. Usually Audacity does a good job at recovering those, but it only caught a small fraction and the other ones were gone. So, I did promise we were going to do some lore stuff, so I will do a really late lore on Wendigos versus Skinwalkers, similarities and alike. So we will dive right into that right now, starting with Skinwalkers. Skinwalkers originate from Navajo Native American lore, and we'll just call it lore. It's not to discredit the belief or anything, but anyway, so they are believed to be more of witch doctors. They are physical beings, and there's been a lot of misconceptions. Shows like Ghost Adventures, completely portray them in the wrong way according to legend. And basically, Skinwalkers are witch doctors. There's a sort of witch that fell to dark magic, dark, blood sacrifice tendencies. And so they aren't, creatures. They can be killed. So I guess it's kind of weird because you look at one side and all the fictional characters and all the fictional lore would describe them more as a creature who could shapeshift, and they're tricksters, and there's so much lore out there about Skinwalkers. They become kind of a massive cryptid creature, and things like Skinwalker Ranch, some of the movies that portray them, Ghost Adventures, who portray them in a completely different way. They almost portray them as a demon entity, which is just absolutely bogus. There's some misconception and there's some arguing, I guess, and it's hard to know because natives, they guard their lore and their secrets, and the more that you speak about it, the more you can bring that in, is kind of their belief. But it's hard to get a story straight about them. If you look at a lot of the stories that you hear, it portrays them as these creatures that can shapeshift into all forms, who try to lure you into the woods alone and eventually, take you. But they feed on your fear. They can mimic, and they can, pretend to be someone else that They'll use their voice to try to mimic and lure you out into the woods. But it's just not what I think the original Skinwalker was. I think the original Skinwalkers, they practiced dark arts, dark, magic. They did blood sacrifice. They believed in, the stealing, theft. They would steal from others. They would sacrifice others for dark. So there was one guy that I was listening to who said he was a Navajo and explained them as people who got stuck in transition. So he did explain them as a kind of a being, but a physical one, in that they used to be a medical doctor, witch doctor, and that there were these 4 mountains that they had to travel to, and they used to shapeshift to get to said mountains, and they would practice a dark magic or do something of that nature, and in one of the transitions they wouldn't transition all the way and they got stuck. And so he kind of pointed at them being more like that, explained that they had to do this whole ceremony and stuff to be able to even transition to this other animal. Most typically coyote, because it's been known to be more of a trickster spirit. Deer, another popular one, but like things like cougar, bear, or your home pet are unlikely. So yeah, I mean, there's some misconceptions about it. I mean, it really depends on what you believe, I guess. I tend to, I'm very open. I tend to believe in kind of all things. And I think the more you give into the thought of something, the more power it gets. So I think skinwalkers have been kind of combined with a couple other creatures like mimics, kind of hard to think of them right now off the top of my head, but there's a couple characteristics that just they're very similar to other creatures, and I think that's just what the fantasy world has done to them over the time, to make them scarier. But I mean, there are still, the basic don't whistle. If someone calls your name in the woods, don't go. So that, I mean, that's still pretty popular. And so that's still pretty much a thing. I think they were said to use like bone powder to like incapacitate people and take them, do sacrifice, cannibalism, what have you. But so they're very different. Like some people just portray them as people who do evil, who wear skins of creatures, who practice some black magic. Other people describe them as being more of a like a cryptid type creature who can stalk and trick you and lure you out to eat you. So I guess believe what you want to believe. Like I said, I'm kind of in the middle. The stories of these are so mixed up over the years that it's hard to get what's actually straight and what's actually just fan fiction at this point. So, and Wendigos are a lot of the same. So Wendigos, they're a weird creature just the same. I mean, I think some people say that they're shapeshifters, and I think a lot of people call skinwalkers Wendigos and Wendigos skinwalkers. So I think that those two legends have kind of melded into two sides of the same coin. And that's why I'm talking about them, is because in some ways they are. I think there's similarities between the two. Wendigos come from the northeast of the U.S., from the Algonquin tribes. And, this is Michigan, Wisconsin, the Superior, Canada area. So I think that's a popular forest creature. One of the most popular, other than Thunderbird and, Bigfoot, something like that. It's very well known. And this one is also kind of a shapeshifter, I would say. It's typically portrayed as a deer, but again, it's one of those things where it's like it's hard to tell what's fact and fiction because of so many portrayals over the years. You have movies that have done things on the Wendigo, and you have all sorts of people who claim that they know the lore, that they've seen it, but they all say different things. So it's very, very hard to get a factual statement and to know that that's true. And like I mentioned earlier, Native Americans are pretty tight-knit. They don't like to talk about these stories to outsiders and stuff. A lot of the times they think that talking about them introduces that. The more talking about it that you do, the more power that you do. So it's kind of one of those things that they'll tell down to the people that they know, believe, family members, blood, stuff like that, part of the tribe. But outsiders don't really get that story, which is completely fine. Like you have your own culture and stuff, and maybe that's just not for other people to hear and be a part of. Understandable. But as someone who kind of believes in everything, I really like to know what the truth is. I really like to know a little bit of everything. I'm very conscious about these kind of things. So it seems like the thing that Wendigos and Skinwalkers are kind of different is that Wendigos usually don't mimic. I don't know. There's a lot of similarities. It's just been so muddled over in the past that it's really hard to get the differences. But mostly Wendigos have seemed to have antlers, to be bipedal, to walk in all fours and to stalk their prey, try to lure them out into the woods. And these are not to be seen as like humans. These are actual creatures, as far as what I know goes. And they, I think, and they're known to be around like the winter, the cold time. And I think as the most popular legend for this goes, is that they were natives or someone who committed a terrible evil by consuming others' flesh, cannibalism, and eventually through doing it a lot, starting to enjoy it, they turned into this monster. And some Native Americans believe that this is just kind of a ghost story to teach people, not to eat their own, and greed and stuff like that. But as like I said, a believer in everything, I think that there's some truth and some fiction. So do I believe in them? I'm open to it. I can't say that I do, can't say that I don't. I do a lot of camping, as you know. This is kind of an outdoor camping and all things Huckleberry podcast, but it's some things in the woods are hard to explain. And I've come across people that don't believe in it at all, and I would say I think that gives them more power. I think when you're more open to things, you're more susceptible to them. So, and then it's the same thing as ghosts and all other things. If you're open to the idea of ghosts, or if you are a hardcore believer, I think you open your mind to more spiritually. You open your mind to that connection. And I think that they can feel that. I think that they see that you're weaker in that, I guess, in that sort of way. Someone who doesn't believe will continue to say that it's just the old house, or, wood creaking, pipes banging, etc. Flashes through the window. Oh, that's just a reflection. Apparitions. Oh, I must have just had something in my eye. They'll keep doing that until it pretty much just grabs them. So I'm open to it. I do believe in this stuff. I find this stuff fascinating. Skinwalkers and Wendigos are definitely on the more far side, along with like Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, etc. Again, not to discount lore and call it silly. I'm not saying that, but it's on more of an extreme side. Right, people have claimed to get videos of it. None of it really seems real, but you have to imagine that these, more spiritual creatures, they have magic that we don't understand and that we likely won't for a long time, and they can hide from us when they want to. If you believe that Wendigos can shapeshift, they can shapeshift into an animal. Skinwalkers are supposed to hide inside of coyote packs. That way they can kind of stalk better. And so there's all sorts of ways that they could try and get around this. Why haven't we found them yet? Things that don't want to be found won't be found. That's kind of the I guess end all be all here. If you don't want to be found as one of these types of creatures, you won't be. Mistakes happen sometimes, you get caught off guard, but a lot of these creatures, they can see you, smell you, hear you before you even know or have an inkling they exist. And the similarity that pretty much all goes around is when the forest gets quiet, then there's something around. So usually you have background noise like the wind, the leaves, there are crickets and frogs and birds, and when all of that stops, don't assume that it's peace. I would get nervous. That's pretty much the consensus with all of these, no matter what side that you believe in. The forest and the earth, they know when something is out of place, and they silence when something like that happens. Now, as far as trying to kill these things, not that I'm saying that any of us ever would or will even see them, but as far as weaknesses, fire is the main. I've heard ash, because that has how would you say, purifying properties. Ash arrow, ash dipped bullet, that would do it. And they both typically don't like light, so fire pits, flashlights, stuff like that, they tend to stay away from. Street lamps, this and that. So they don't like light, they don't like fire. If you look at the traditional skinwalker aspect of it, they're very physical, they can die from anything. Wendigos are a little bit more difficult. I think Supernatural had one of the more realistic portrayals of it. And not saying that it was realistic, I'm just saying it had one of the more realistic compared to others. So if you want to check that out, just Google search it. But so yeah, it's a hard topic. It's like it's like trying to get people to agree on ghosts or one Bigfoot. Like, oh, there's Bigfoot, then there's, what do they call that swamp creature down in Florida? It's pretty much the same thing as a Bigfoot. And then you have the Yeti, and then you have, you go to a different country, they have a different word for it. I do find it interesting that in Michigan, there is also a legend called Dogman. Dogman is a bipedal, 7-foot tall creature, honestly most closely related to a werewolf. And originally, this really gained popularity by a radio show host that did a song about him in Michigan, saying that he originated from a county near kind of Traverse City area. And I just so happened to live there, and I have actually seen something when I was camping long term in that area. I lived just under 5 miles of where he said this original sighting happened, and I didn't really put much place into it till later in life after I learned the lore. But it's one of those things that, like, he put the song out. People started believing it. People were like, oh yeah, I've definitely had that experience. And it was one of those, like, a light turned on kind of things. So he made it kind of as a joke, and it played out like that for a long time, that it was real. It was kind of just a spooky thing that he did, and it was a song. Just look up the Legend of Dogman, the song, and you'll get it. It's a great song. Very creepy, eerie, one of those really cool legend songs like the Edmund Fitzgerald that Michigan has. So yeah, I mean, he played that. I don't think he expected it to blow up like that, and then all of a sudden their show started getting calls about all sorts of creatures that have been seen, like Dogman. People started coming out and saying, like, yeah, I've seen this. Yeah, I've seen it before. Or evidence started coming out, videos. Like, they gained popularity, and I think, and this is my stretch theory, that Dogman could be misconstrued or seen as a Wendigo. I think people have seen a Wendigo, and they have pretty close to the same similarities as far as body features, height. I think the main difference is, like, the face, but in the dark, like, how much are you seeing of this thing? So I think that Wendigo is Dogman, or vice versa. If Wendigos can shapeshift, maybe that's what's going on. But Some people say they can, some say they can't. And so, yeah, I'm just, I'm open to that, and that's my belief, is that I think, like I said, there's truth to fiction, and I think that when people heard that song, they put two and two together. Obviously, like, Lupin, werewolves have been along for a long time. Before America, they had stories of them in Europe. They have stories of them from a long time ago. I mean, Egyptians have them as gods, right? Dog people, cat people, whatever. So, I mean, there are a lot of there's a lot of history to back this kind of thing. But, you know, when I was camping, this is near Cadillac, Michigan, and I had a very, like, weird encounter. I was camping on the far end of some relatives' property, close to some railroad tracks, and I was camping in a tent. I had been there for about a year, and coming from being a city boy to camping full time, it was definitely a change, and I loved it. I woke up one night. Things kind of got quiet. I think I had actually just get up and pee. And I just kept hearing stuff in the woods. And at this point, I was used to hearing stuff. Like, it's not a big deal. But for some reason tonight, it just felt eerie. It felt darker than typical. Felt like the moon wasn't out as much. It felt like... I think as a human, you have a basic fight or flight. And I think you have something very deep down that tells you when something isn't right? And I think some of these people will drown that sense and that fear, but as someone who is really open to these possibilities before, who was just open, like I didn't believe or non-believe, but I was open to it, I think I've always kept pretty sensitive feel to that feeling, you know. And when I went out to pee, ever since I got up, it just felt odd. Didn't feel normal. For some reason, as I was getting out of my tent, I hesitated. I went back and I grabbed my flashlight. I typically don't do that. I typically have good enough night vision in the dark that I don't have to. And for some reason, this time I just felt like I had to. So I went and grabbed my flashlight. It's about, 7-8 inches long, one of those big LED mag light type ones that can, flash for like hundreds of yards ish, depends. And I got out, I peed. It was really quiet. Like, the wind has stopped. There was no wind, no animals, middle of summer, no frogs. I was right near a pond and nothing. And I was like, that's odd. And, I'm just peeing. I'm just looking at this point. I hear something in the woods, and it was a small stick crack, nothing less than what a deer would make. And I said, "Oh, cool, a deer." At that point, I was taking pictures, kind of doing like photography and stuff as a hobby. So I was like, "Oh, cool, a deer. Maybe I can get a long exposure of a deer. That would be really cool if we could get one to stand still." So I shined my flashlight in one hand while I was holding my pecker with the other. And I saw eyes. And I was like, "Oh, okay. I think that's a deer. It's different color eyes than a deer usually has, but there's no other thing that has eyes that tall." So originally, I was kind of staring at it. I finished my business, but I never broke contact with it. I kind of did it blind, put my stuff back and kept eye contact with it. And I was trying to focus the beam on the flashlight so that it would reach out and expose the, figure of it, the deer. And I was apprehensive. I wanted to get my camera and grab it, but I didn't want to spook it away by going in my tent. But it sat there. I think I looked at it for 2 minutes, focused the beam, unfocused the beam, tried to get some features of it, and I just couldn't. All I could get was eyes. So I kind of said, okay, well, it feels like it's not going anywhere. So I went and got my camera, came back, still there. And I said, oh, okay, that's odd. So I held my camera in one hand and had my Nikon camera in the other and tried getting the camera to focus on the eyes while I had the flashlight on it, and took a picture. The click was pretty loud, and it kind of moved a little. And I said, oh, okay, so it heard that click. And so I figured if it wasn't moving, I would approach. Again, I just thought this was a deer. I just couldn't get a good enough picture on it. So I started walking closer and closer, and it didn't really move for a good 5 to 10 feet of me walking. And then I would say at about, probably 30 yards I got from it, it started to move. So I stopped. Still couldn't get a really, and these were like, it was kind of beyond the trees. If you ever been to an old town, there's a lot of hills and pits that are just kind of a natural, that over a couple hundred years after the town's completely destroyed, there's just hills and pits from the garbage that they've dumped, from the fires that happened throughout the old logging towns. There's just really natural ones. They go up a couple feet, they go down. So it was behind one of those, with the tall grass that you get typically near a pond. Not reeds, but just the tall kind of field grass. And I'm just trying to get a better look at it at this point. The woods are still really quiet. I'm starting to get that hair on the back of my neck feeling. So as I'm staring at it, it finally backs up a little bit. It shifts. And I'm like, oh, okay, it's going to run. So I try to take another picture. Same thing. Green eyes, no figure. And I'm like, okay, let's move a little closer. And then it stops. It moves back a little, and then it raises up like 4 feet. And that's kind of when I stopped and go, okay, that's not a deer. So my next thought was a black bear. I couldn't see anything else. I said, okay, I don't know if I want to approach this if it just got that tall. And so at that point I was kind of like, okay, I was kind of scared because I thought it might have been a black bear. And I said, okay, not pushing my luck. I kind of backed up. I heard a knock on like a tree or a branch break. I couldn't tell what it was. Like, usually you get that hollow knock. Like, we know what a knock sounds like, but I couldn't tell if it was like a stick hitting a tree or a break or a knock. And I know that that's typically like a signature of like Bigfoot, right? So I definitely got creeped out at that point. And then I noticed how quiet it was. Like, it was very, very quiet. Quieter than when I had first gotten out of the tent. Like, you don't think that you can hear that quiet, but then you really feel it when everything starts going differently than you expected. You start really picking up on those extra senses, and yeah, it felt quieter. And I kind of just backed away. I was like, yeah, no, we're not fucking with this. I'm not gonna go running towards this creature. I am officially spooked. So I went back into my tent, turned my light on, got my gun, sat in my bed, and just sat there. And I didn't feel anything. It felt really eerie for a while. And a couple hours later, I woke up. I don't know when I fell asleep, and I could hear footsteps around my tent. And I was frozen solid. I was frozen in fear. They didn't feel heavy, so in my mind, I was trying to justify that it was probably a raccoon, something like that. I've had visitors like that pretty commonly. And I don't know still if that was or it wasn't. I have no proof otherwise if it was or wasn't. But after what I had kind of I fell asleep because I was exhausted. First thing I wake up to is sounds around my tent. That was the first thing my mind went to. So I just felt that was an important thing to wake up to. footsteps stopped. It went quiet again. I didn't hear anything. I did cock my gun between that period because I thought that there was something out there and I wanted to be ready. And I thought that if it was a human, if they heard that, then they would stop. They would get the idea. And I've had humans, people around that area. That's another story. But everything stopped. Kind of went back to normal, and I fell asleep again. I woke up in the morning, put my gun down, got dressed, and decided to go take a look. Daylight always makes me a little bolder. So I went to take a look to see if I could find any tracks around my tent. I couldn't really see anything, not like an expert tracker or anything, so I couldn't see, imprints or anything like that. So I walked out to the area where I saw it, and I was very sure of this area. I knew the exact berm it was, sitting behind, and I thought this berm was pretty shallow. And when I walked up to it, I realized that the berm was pretty deep. This berm, these berms and these holes from the old trash pits and stuff from these old towns, they get pretty deep. They can get up to like 10, 12, and even deeper. And so this one was about, I would say 8 to 10 feet. So, with a pretty steep berm coming up to that end. So where I was seeing it, I kind of started measuring where I saw his branch, where I saw his eyes next to this branch over the berm. Kind of started figuring, and I'm like, this thing wasn't sitting on all fours. It must have been crouching to standing, because where I saw it, the branch that I saw it closest to, and I didn't, like I said, I didn't see the figure, I just saw eyes. So I'm trying to measure where I saw the eyes. So I go back to, knowing what I know, I go back to my original place near the tent. I kind of mark that same area with, like what branch and everything it is. And then I go back to it, and I'm kind of trying to measure, like, this is where it was, about how far it was. And I'm like, dude, there's no way. Like, this is 8 or 9 feet off the ground. I didn't have a tape measure, but it was taller by me by almost me and a half. I'm 5'11", so it was, I wanted to say 2 to 3 feet taller than me. And it's kind of where I started to get creeped out. I'm like, dude, okay, so this was a Bigfoot. I don't know. It's one of those things that as a human, you think like there's a basic level of danger, and then there's like hair coming up on your arms, legs, and back of your neck, that kind of danger, and that's what I felt. And I'm like, okay, I'm creeped out, and I stayed pretty close to my tent after that. I always had a light on, and respected and feared these things for a while. As I was digging more into Wendigos, Dogman, and other lore, I found out a lot of this later, and I've talked about my story a few times, and I found out that, one, this is after I had already camped there a year or so, and this is a couple years after, and I found out that where Dogman originated from, at least in the story, was very close to where I was. And I mean very close to, like, within 5 miles. So that was eerie, but I still chalked it up to Bigfoot. When I told this story, someone told me, hey, they connected the dots, because I was explaining it just like this, trying to give as much detail as possible. And they said, maybe you saw Dogman. And I said, what? And then everything clicked. I thought this 8-foot being was a Bigfoot, but what are the chances of 2 of these creatures being within the same area, So, do I know that it was a Bigfoot? No. Do I know that it was a Dogman? No. Do I think it was another animal? I don't think so. Like I said, I at that point when I was camping, I was still a little newer, still getting used to all the sounds and stuff, but I knew when something wasn't right. You know, everybody can get that basic feeling. So that's my story, and I think that I did come across a dog man or a wendigo. It just makes sense for that area. And you know, I said earlier in this podcast episode that I believe that wendigo and dogman could be one and the same. You know, they have a lot of similarities, and I think that it's possible. So I believe that I seen something. Whether it was a dogman, wendigo, or Bigfoot, I don't know. I do believe in cryptids, and I believe I saw something. And anytime the woods get quiet or don't feel right, I always take that into note. There are some places that you just should not be. There are Native American burial grounds. There are places that have been cursed. I mean, there are some places that you walk into that you feel like, oh, I don't like that. And I've left campsites because of that. I have, as someone who has overlanded quite a bit in Michigan, you know, there was points where I was camping every weekend for 4 to 5 days. And you get to some camp spots and you're like, ooh, this doesn't sit right with me. It's too quiet. It's too dark. And you listen to your mind. You listen to your, you know, your comfort level and your body. And you're just like, ooh, I don't like how quiet this is. I don't like this feeling. I will drive somewhere else. So that's a little bit of my story. That's a little bit about Skinwalkers, Wendigos. You can always go look them up. If you find something completely different or you find it an extremely accurate account, let me know. There's just so many different stories, and it's kind of hard to put together what's right and what's not. So on that note, I will see you guys later. Thanks for listening, and hopefully you don't have any of these encounters, or hopefully you do if you want to. Personally, camping with my family, I don't. I'd rather stay away from them. But, you know, I'm packing, so I don't care what anybody says. If it could take 19 rounds and a whole nother mag, then, I don't know, man. Ain't no way, in my mind, anything's taken that many rounds and happy about it, you know? I'll go major pain on it. I will shoot through that fucking tent, and I'll ask questions later. Thanks. Have a good day.